Yo, let's go and welcome to the video. I've been thinking about the Season of Mastery and how it's going, and on my old server on a Friday night, we have 8 level 60s, including myself. This is Horde side on Obsidian Edge. My old guild transferred and moved to Shadow Strike a couple months ago, back when I stopped playing. So another way I check to see how well it's going for Boomkins in particular is by checking Warcraft logs phase 3 and 4 and just checked Molten Core out instead of any of the newer raids. We've got 21 Boomkins with full Molten Core clears. I went a step further. I reached out to the rank 1 Molten Core player from phase 3 and 4 and asked could I run a couple questions by them for a sort of interview. So they were nice enough to accept, and so here's what I asked and here's what they had to say. So I'm going to be scrolling up and down, but I'll read them out question by question and their response. So starting off, the first question, I noticed that they switched servers, which I did too, so I was wondering like what the server pop kind of is for Season of Mastery right now. Did it start off strong, then get hard to fill raids, and that's why they transferred? I was just trying to figure out what the reasoning behind the transfer was. I know it was a free transfer a couple months ago, and was it the whole guild that transferred, or was it just them that transferred? So the server they originally played was Obsidian Edge, just like me, and it was doing fine. I think that's the hardcore server for Alliance, since they're Alliance, the Road to Rag. And there was a healthy amount of guilds, and being the largest guild, we managed to get 2 raid teams going. Then for some reason, Blizzard decided to open free server transfers, and that little by little eroded player population to the point where every other guild transferred. My guild hung around and had world bosses on perma lockdown. That's pretty cool. And there was next to no gathering competition, but raiding numbers dwindled to the point where we had no choice but to transfer. My guess is after the Road to Rag was done, that the population on that server, along with that free server transfer, just made Obsidian Edge just completely die on both sides. So I was wondering, professions-wise, what they chose. ZA just came out recently for Season of Mastery, and I couldn't remember of it while I was asking the question, but the Bloodvine set is what I was thinking of. If they were planning on getting that. The hit gear from ZA I knew is a nice upgrade when it comes out, but yeah, they didn't have any pieces of it, on the logs at least. So I asked, is there just enough hit gear from the loot chains Blizz did, adding in the later dungeon gear? I know there's like 4 or 5 pieces with hit from that we could start off with, so maybe the ZA gear just and the Bloodvine just wasn't too much of an upgrade now. But they said my Moonkin alt in Classic ran Bloodvine as they were a tailor, but I honestly grew to dislike the set. Kind of on the same page. You're just forced to wear those 3 pieces of gear until you can find upgrades for the whole set. And as good as it may seem, using Bloodvine almost felt like an abusive relationship. Yes, the set is actually pretty good, but I don't like how it narrowed your perspective on those gear slots and caused you to completely discount the potential of other gear options out of fear for breaking this set. So this time around for Season of Mastery, I decided to only play 1 tune, and after really enjoying the spec in Classic, I decided to go all in on Moonkin. Being my only character and realizing I would be a heavy consumer, I went Herb Alk, both having some luck with 2 world boss drops and not taking advantage of the Bloodvine 2 spell crit bonus by not being a tailor. I decided to try finding hit in other slots instead and see how that impacted my DPS from raid to raid. Yeah, I noticed they had, I think, like the pants and the boots, something like that from the world boss, which those pieces for Boomkins are pretty cool to have. Alright, question number 3. How are consumes for you? Are you using runes and mana pots on cooldown for bosses? What other buffs have you been using? Are you chugging the distilled wisdom flasks? I know that was something people were doing on like the PTR, and back when I was on the PTR, you'd run out of mana, chug another distilled wisdom flask, and it's like a infinite mana pot, basically. It would give you 2,000 mana, burn that mana, chug another distilled wisdom flask, and continue on with the rest of the fight. And since you can proc the alchemy flasks now, I was wondering if that was maybe what they were doing, or are they just using a spell power flask? So not gonna lie, balance and managing your mana pool in phase 1 of Season of Mastery was pretty tough. I farmed 60 odd demonic runes weekly, and just about every boss was the same rotation. Demonic rune, major mana pot, innervate, demonic rune, major mana pot. Yep, and aside from that, the usual supreme spell power flask, Nightfin soup, greater arcane elixir, and wizard oil. I also carry lips as I tend to snap pull aggro on trash. Yeah, that's a thing with Moonfire especially, or if your first Starfire crits and you precast it a little bit, I can definitely see how lips would be useful. And since the introduction of ZG, new gear and new recipes like Mage Blood potions, I tend to only need one demonic rune for most boss fights now. Moving right along, what's your role in the raid? Are you keeping up Fairy Fire? Are you giving away your Innervate? And if so, to what class and spec? Are you the first to battle res? So basically, like, are they only there for support, or are they allowed to do DPS? I used to throw up Fairy Fire fairly often, but the other druids tend to do now, so only pop it if I see it drop off for too long. I'm left to do my own thing and purely focus on DPS. Really cool. I love that they're not just there to give Innervate to somebody else, and they get to keep it. In the early days, I would help with decursing some fights, and still do from time to time. I'll also max rank battle res if needed, but I save Innervates for myself. I tend to be grouped with Lux and an occasional mage, but I see that changing to full mage once they go fire in a Q40. So they kind of answered question 5 with that, what's your group comp look like? So down to question 6. You have 100 parse on Ani and almost every boss in Molten Core. What 3 things do you think most contributed to you getting that high on the logs? So would you believe all those parses were just 3% hit? That's insane. I know with 3 or 4% hit, I was getting a ton of resists. I think it really boils down to DPS uptime and viewing any and all trash pulls as being literally as important as boss DPS. Remember that spell hit only really matters for level 63 mobs. Yeah, so bosses is really the only thing that needs more than that 3% hit. But still, to get the highest boss parse with only 3%, nuts. So as for reaching 100% parses in general, not too hard given the quality of my gear and the shallow, balanced spec player pool. Yeah, only 21 or so Moonkin in the pool seems really, really low. That's the entire Season of Mastery player pool. Only 21. And tonight's raid, I finally got 2% more hit from some ZG gear, so up to 5 total. I saw that they got this staff from ZG, so that's a pretty nice piece to have. So how is the speed of the phases being released felt? Is it nicer than in Classic? Is it too fast? I know looking at the updates on Wowhead seems like it's going pretty fast, from my point of view. The cadence of patches has actually been fine. Releasing Dire Maul and the tier 0.5 bosses at the start was a great springboard. Upping the raid boss loot drops and the earlier than planned release of ZG were all great things, in my opinion. Certainly more enjoyable than Classic, and I don't feel pressured for more time between patches. How has the boss mechanic changes affected progression? Does it take a few lockouts to get the bosses down? Do you think it's a good change? So the boss changes were great, at least for me who has done these bosses literally forever. I appreciate the tweak. That together with removing world buffs has meant people needed to really focus mechanics a lot more than in Classic. But do you plan on doing a second Season of Mastery if Blizzard releases it again for Season 2? Oh, I love vanilla to bits, and I see myself coming back for future seasons. That's pretty encouraging. I think I would try it again too if they released a second season and see how it goes. So what changes would you want to see if there is a second season? Talent changes, spell changes, gear, consumes. So overall, I feel like the game could use a huge amount of changes. That said, I don't want to see the game ruined, so the sorts of things I would love to see would be a few things like give us some of the later battlegrounds, but rebalanced for level 60. I think they mean like Eye of the Storm. I don't remember the ones past the Burning Crusade. And also revamp the reward and ranking system for PvP some more. Seeing as the tier 0.5 chain was released at launch, why not introduce a new 0.5 set focused around each class's spec? Really cool idea. Definitely hope they do something like that. Move all tier sets to a token-based system and introduce sets for alternate specs. So kind of like TBC has, is what I'm guessing. And for God's sakes, give us the guild bank from TBC. I hadn't even thought of this. It was released in vanilla, but sadly towards the end. We need it in the game from the start. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think some of the off-specs could use a little attention. Being Moonkin, I fixed the class by allowing you to stay in Moonkin form, to innervate, decurse, cleanse, battle res, and buff. While in owl form, grant 10 mana per 5. Perhaps give the balance tree a talent granting 4% hit. So yeah, a couple more changes that they made for TBC. Definitely need all of these. Maybe not the cleanse, Battle Res would be really nice to be able to do, and even Mark of the Wild. We can Thorns in form, but being able to Mark of the Wild in Moonkin would be huge. And some extra mana and the 4% hit for sure. ZG could also use a revamp of Idle Enchants. I forgot about the Idle Enchants from ZG too. The head and pants off specs. I know the Druid one was mainly for healers, I think. My ideal balance focused one would be something neat, like some mana per 5, spell power, and hit. And do you plan on riding the first season all the way out through Nax? Oh, for sure, I'll ride out all of Season of Mastery, assuming my guild survives, which it will. Having played this long, you get a feel for these things. That's pretty cool. And was there anything else that I might not have mentioned that you would like to add? So having done a similar thing with Shadow Priest, there seems to be an unfortunate, perhaps elitist, perspective on lesser played off specs. I'm partly playing the Moonkin because it really is actually a lot of fun, but also partly to dispel the myth that it's somehow uncompetitive. Granted, if everyone played like robots, fully consumed, pulled off raids flawlessly, and had exactly the same gear, Moonkin would theoretically do less DPS. That certainly is not the reality of Season of Mastery, where people struggle to pull a functional set of gear together, let alone a best-in-slot one. Perhaps it's just my masochistic personality that has driven me to prove otherwise, but I'm looking forward to how far I can push this chicken going forward. Oh, and one last one, people are too focused on hit capping and thinking that's all they need to worry about as a spellcaster. Just saying. I know back in Classic, I was just like I am in TBC, and I was going, all spell power for my Moonkin. And what I did was I just got Nat Pagel's Broken Reel, and I would use this on boss fights. So I might have only had like 6% hit, but I would get hit capped with this trinket. Only 15 seconds, but every minute and 15 seconds, I got to use it a couple times for some of the fights. Alright, so I asked a couple more questions after I got those first round of answers. And after looking at your logs, I see you don't use Moonfire too often. Is it because it's a mana issue? Do you find it doesn't do enough DPS compared to just casting Starfire? Also, I don't see Insect Swarm being used at all. Is that just because you can't cast it while in Moonkin form? So there's no chance to really use it? Do you even have it spec'd? When I was playing the first phase of Season of Mastery, I was at least using Moonfire. Insect Swarm, not so much either. But I was really surprised to see Moonfire not being cast too much. So everything Moonkin is mana constrained. All the gear and DPS in the world won't help you if you run out of mana. So I take a conservative, less is more approach to spells and gearing. I just start with the basics of my primary Starfire spell and spam that. As the fights organically become shorter over time, via general raid gearing and comfort around mechanics, I can start looking to adjust spell rotation. Moonfire is a nice finisher to back onto Starfire when clearing trash, but it resets the global cooldown for Starfire, so you're left waiting. It's also, as you alluded, an issue of mana. For any fights where I need to adjust position, I'll try to drop a Moonfire, as it's an instant cast, and go back to Starfire spam. So they're almost using Moonfire like we are using Insect Swarm right now in TBC. So no, I don't have Insect Swarm spec. Instead, I figured out a delicious spec that allowed me to push 13 points into Resto for 3 out of 3 reflection, hence granting 15% mana regen while casting, though I only have 19 mana per 5 from gear now. I do have a solid amount of spirit, so raid buffed, I reach around 80 mana per 5 while casting. I'll be adding more mana per 5 via some more planned gear choices later, but to be honest, mana is becoming a non-issue at my gear level. Up to question 14, you mentioned Battlegrounds and revamping the rewards and rankings for PvP. Do you mean adding more Battlegrounds like Eye of the Storm, like TBC, and for the PvP rewards, I'm guessing having a different set for each spec, balanced Resto Feral is what you would want, just like for the tier gear with the tokens. And I'd be over the moon happy if Blizzard were to gradually add in just about all the Battlegrounds and even go a step further and introduce an open world PvP zone, like what they were planning Azshara to be. Anything that adds a deeper, richer pool of gear would be great, and PvP has, over time, proven to be a good alternative gear source to PvE. With enough thought and care, I think it should be expanded to include options for all specs, if nothing more than to introduce new metas for people to enjoy playing with and discovering over time. Right now there's only the one set for druids, 2 set for 20 stamina, 3 set bonus, increase your movement speed by 15% while in bear, cat, or travel, only active outdoors, and then the 6 set plus 40 attack power. The legs have some int and spirit on it. That's about it for Moonkin. The other pieces do have some spell power and crit I don't remember if the crit strike is spell crit too, or if that's just for melee. I don't remember. But if they could come up with some other sets instead of just this one, that'd be huge. So have there been any changes that you didn't like? I'll be brutally honest, all the changes were great so far, and I'm looking forward to more. And last but not least, what kind of loot system does your guild have, and what kind of loot system did the world bosses have? So we simply go with a 2-item soft reserve with main spec over off spec with a tiny handful of loot council items. Seems pretty fair. I do like soft reserve and 10-man raids right now. Getting to choose and let everybody know pretty much what you're there for, so you have an idea before the raid even starts of how much competition there is and all that stuff. It's actually worked perfectly fine for us, as you have transparency, very little to manage for a loot master, and works pretty smoothly with the greater amount of loot dropping from bosses. Rarities and molten core like mana cord, toe-up, and rings of spell power are pretty common. Going for 2 spell power rings is totally doable by anyone wanting them, for instance. Last MC, we had a double ring of spell power drop off one boss, and for the world bosses was just an open roll main spec over off spec. So that's going to wrap up the quote-unquote interview. Huge shout out to Mimo. Thank you so much for taking all the time to respond to all those questions. It seems like although the server pop isn't too high for Season of Mastery, but I'm guessing the people that are still playing are having a blast. So if you're still playing Season of Mastery, let me know in the comments how you're liking it so far. And let me know how I did on this interview. I know it's kind of lame to just listen to me reading off stuff that's already on the screen. So any suggestions you guys have, I will put into action in the next interview that I get to do.